Welcome everybody. Welcome to Transpolitica 2016. My name's David Wood. It's my pleasure to say a few words at the beginning before we hand over to the main speakers for the day, each of whom are going to look in various ways at real-world policy changes for a radically better future. In a few minutes I'm going to kick off with a few comments about the present-day politics, some of the problems of present-day politics, and to discuss prospects for a better politics in the future. Just a reminder that if you are wishing to share some of these thoughts online, there's a hashtag LandFut. You can tell my days as a software engineer when every byte mattered. I picked short hashtags, #LandFuturists, LandFut. And if you are thinking of asking questions, we'll see how it's going to go. There are web pages which you can get to fairly easily on your smartphones or on your laptops, which is an opportunity for you to ask questions as you go and to vote on each other's questions. So I don't think anybody's asked a question for my session yet, but we'll get there shortly. Yes, no question asked yet. And as we move through the day, we're going to have other sessions, and each different presentation that has its own dedicated page. And even though we won't be able to answer all the questions in the session, the point is we will capture important feedback from the audience. What does the audience think are the key questions that deserve further attention? And after lunch, another 3, and then another 4 sessions, another 4 presentations in the session after a break. So let's get back to the subject of present-day politics and things that are wrong with it and getting worse, and prospects for doing things better. So I suppose some of you know who this individual is. I'll confess, he's not my favourite politician. He will be the Vice President of America in a couple of months' time, and possibly within a year. Well, he's only one impeachment away, or one resignation away from being the so-called leader of the free world. He's not, I confess, my favourite politician because, well, he's not very pro-science. He thinks that biblical creationist theory or intelligent design should be taught in classes with equal prominence as evolutionary theory. He's not a fan of embryonic stem cell research either, and his views on marriage and on homosexual relationships seem to be driven by what's written in the Old Testament book rather than by modern science. So he's not my favourite politician, and when this picture popped up on my social media feed a few days ago, I had to chuckle. I thought, he's an anti-gay politician, and he's like many other anti-gays, he's going to be found out. And look at this picture with the exposed nipple and apparently a younger version of Mike Pence. And the person who posted it, a friend of a friend, Dawn, I'll obscure the rest of her name, said, well, I have not verified this, but I wouldn't be surprised. Sharing just because, even if fake, it will piss this fucker off. And before I shared it in turn, I did look further down in the chat, and Snopes had already clarified this is not a picture of a young Mike Pence. It's well known who this is. It's somebody totally different. And this whole story is entirely fake. But still, after it was first shared, mischievously, by this person, Louis Maka, it had already in 1 week been shared by 25,000 people who thought this is the story that needs to be spread around. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about the problems for politics that this kind of thing happens. And we had a lot of discussion that Denzel Washington, this renowned and highly reputed black actor, was backing Trump. He'd come out and said, Trump is the right politician, completely fake as well. Took other people's words and mixed it in. Words that this person here, George Soros, was going to bring down the United States by funding black hate groups. That was shared huge numbers of times as well, also completely made up. And even this delicious quote by Donald Trump, which apparently he said in 1998 in People magazine that if he were to run in the future, he'd run as a Republican because they have the dumbest group of voters and believe anything on fake news and Fox News. That's also fake. And too much of our politics is dominated by such stories. In fact, one story that had even wider impact in the recent American election was this one. FBI agents suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide, with a long story about the name of this person who is investigating Hillary Clinton's private email server and then shot and killed his 33-year-old wife, set the couple's home on fire and killed himself, and got shared by more than 500,000 people. And many of the people I know online were telling me that I ought to pay attention to this, and this just shows how terrible a person Hillary Clinton is. Now, the person who actually made up the story, which is fake, of course, was tracked down. There's no such publication apart from a few online pages for the Denver Guardian. There's no such person as Michael Brown. There's no Susan Brown with these descriptions. The person who made this, it was a bit difficult to find, but National Public Radio did track him down shortly later. He's a 40-year-old, a registered Democrat. You know, he actually would have wanted Hillary Clinton to win the election, but he makes a lot of money from the ads that he sells on his websites. It's not clear exactly how much, $10,000 to $30,000 a month. He's got 20 to 25 people writing stories like this for him full-time, trying to make them plausible, trying to make them clickable, trying to make them shareable, and trying to make money for his organization. And apparently they said they tried to write fake news for liberals, but liberals don't take the bait. I don't believe that either, because many liberals were sharing that other story about the Mike Pence having a gay past. And he says he's not just in this for the money, he likes messing people up. You know, he likes many teenagers, you know, he likes catching people out and thinking that he's smarter than them. And does this affect the election? He says, no, of course this doesn't affect the election. Who's going to be influenced by this? It's just a bit of fun, and he makes a bit of pocket money. And this last phrase, doesn't think fake news swayed the election, reminds me of this statement from 1935 by the American writer Upton Sinclair. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it. And of course, if the likes of Justin Collar and others were to realise what really was happening with their stories, they wouldn't be able to go ahead and make money out of it. And of course, there is a whole industry that disbelieves this view. There's a whole industry that does know that stories have a big impact on people's behaviour. That's the advertising industry, which is all there for exactly the purpose of changing people's thinking and changing people's behaviour. This is the worst of all in some ways. This was highlighted briefly in this short video, which I showed you earlier. It's by Milos Yiannopoulos, who was subsequently banned from Twitter. His story was debunked within 24 hours on Snopes. Yes, Sweden were changing the rules about Christmas trees, but none of the announcements had anything at all to say about Muslims. It was entirely his exaggeration, his suggestion of put this together. Hence, this was taken as the example in this video. And how did I find this video? Well, it's my friend Dawn again. You know, exactly the same Dawn that we spoke about before. This comes from the Incitement organization on Facebook. Don't share things, especially if they're insightful, before you check. But Dawn, as I said, the same person who passed on this good piece of news, had already at the same time passing on this news, this fake news, just because she thought it would annoy the people that she wanted to annoy, and contributing to this case. Now, I'm not pointing a finger at one person. I am guilty too. I'm certainly not pointing a finger at America here. We have plenty of problems with fake news here in the UK as well. Lots of things that were said by both sides on the Brexit debate were exaggerations and then sometimes just entirely made up by some of our so-called leading journalists and leading politicians. But I do think this is posing a big challenge to democracy, and more generally a big challenge to something I passionately care about, which is the wisdom of the crowd. It's been known for a long time. Many people have been quoted saying things like this. Jonathan Swift, the English writer in 1710, said, "Falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it." And even after the story has been debunked, people forget that it changed their emotion, it made them change their minds, and it pushed them from one camp into another. What's worse today compared to 1710? 1710 took a long time for falsehood to fly around the world in quite such a dramatic way. Online media is magnifying the speed, as we saw 500,000 shares in just a few days of some of these stories. And there's a great deal of ingenuity, as I mentioned, from the ad tech industry. Lots of the cleverest people leave university and get paid money to devise adverts to make people click on them. And some of that same evil ingenuity, or let's just call it ingenuity, has been operated in big time to get people to buy into fake stories. Make people angry as well. And we can't really have a wisdom of the crowds if people are being driven by the anger as has been said, when your heart's on fire, smoke gets in your eye, smoke gets in your eyes, the feelings of us and them are amplified, and instead of being more concerned to tell the truth, we're more concerned to signal or to pass on things that make us look good in the eyes of the people that we identify with. So this is damaging our democracy, is damaging it more seriously than expected below, and is risking of escalating negative feedback cycles in which more and more people are driven into this, and I'm certainly guilty as well, passing on things which a quieter, more calmer version of myself would have thought more carefully about. Rather than the wisdom of crowds, we're seeing the madness of crowds. Rather than having our society being governed by, in the phrase of Abraham Lincoln, and more recently the writer Steven Pinker, the better angels of our nature, we've been driven more and more with this heated argument by the inner demons of our nature. So that takes me to some positive proposals. These are one of the problems which, alas, technology has made worse. Those of us who thought technology would just improve education, would help everybody to see what was true and what was not true, we can see that technology is not just a force for good, it is often a force for causing more problems. So to regain the wisdom of the crowd, so that we are better at tapping into all of our knowledge, to figure out what are the restrictions, the regulations, the subsidies and the incentives we need to govern our collective endeavours, to govern the development of science, to govern who comes into power. How can we do this? Well, I've got a few suggestions. Just a reminder that there may be some questions that you might want to drop into that webpage. Nobody's asked any yet, which is fine. It means you're all paying a great deal of attention to me, which is I like. But if there's something you wanted to question, I've got 5 proposals, which I'm just outlining quickly here. And some of the speakers who come after me are going to go into these in more detail. So, yes, we have lots more ingenuity into circulating falsehoods. But at the same time, we do have lots of technology which is able quite quickly to find out what facts are disputed, what facts are contentious. And increasingly, it would be great is if when we go to a website, just as currently, we often get warnings, are you aware this website may have malware, be careful about clicking on this link. Increasingly, our websites will say to us, you have loaded this story, do you know this story has already been debunked on Snopes or whatever. Of course, people don't always buy into the objectivity or independence of an organisation such as Snopes, and they've got their own views as to what's reliable information or not, but we should be working on that. Also, as there are fines for misleading advertisements from the commercial world, I think we do have to look with some care at fines for misleading political articles. The people who wrote these fake news stories, which I showed earlier, ought to be held accountable. Now they may say it's satire, and indeed I want to protect the ability of people to use satire. I want to protect the ability of people to joke and make fun of politicians. So this is a dangerous thing to talk about, that there might be prosecutions and fines for misleading political articles, but I think it's something else that needs to be on the agenda for us to discuss. There might in due course be AIs who gently stop us doing things online, that review what we're doing, and in quieter, calmer moments help us to think. Or maybe actually we could have phrased this argument differently. In the same way that present day AIs help to correct our spelling, or even our grammar sometimes, in due course some of these AIs, and possibly quite soon, will help us to prevent us from being unnecessarily angry, unnecessarily irrational in what we spread. And maybe there's a different kind of technology that might help us here, which is if we have the right kind of smart drugs, the right kind of smart helmets that reprogram our brains to put us in our better reflective states, then maybe this will help us not to fall into the madness of crowds. But I left the most important recommendation to last. This is the recommendation that in order to escape from being in an us and them adversarial situation, I think we need more than anything a vision for how the technology that we're talking about can actually uplift and enhance human experience for everybody. And what's driving people into these very strong adversarial arguments is the fear that some people are going to be left out. People are losing control, the view that the future that's coming is not a pleasant future, and we have to do a much better job. And this is what I'm looking to many of the speakers today to do, to highlight how we'll have a sustainable abundance for everybody, with everybody having a good role in it, I call this a techno-progressive transhumanist vision. That's what the various speakers are going to talk about in some parts or another. And if you add the whole lot together, which I hope will be possible to do in your thinking, then you'll see more clearly a vision which I hope everybody in due course will be able to embrace and say, you know, we shouldn't be trying to go to a simpler world from the past. Yes, of course, some of these simpler values are good, but the better future is ahead of us with technology enhancing us, making us healthier, fitter, longer lived, smarter, and indeed kinder, and indeed calmer, and indeed more integrated one with the other. So that's my introduction to this. Thank you very much. Do I want to reload this page? Well, I'm not seeing any questions in here now, so that's fine, because I am out of time, and I'm looking to our first speaker, who's going to come after me in a minute. We're going to move on to the subject of regulations, health, and transformation.